If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the scariest place you have ever visited? I used to help with a mine tour in the mountains as part of a summer camp. It was a pretty straightforward, stick to the path, everything is well lit and well constructed kind of tour. One of our kids wasn't feeling well and decided to turn back without telling anyone. I did a head count and realized I was missing one, so I left the group with the tour guide and another counselor and went looking for the missing idiot. Well, he didn't back to the muck room at the entrance of the mine. So he must have made a wrong turn and accidentally gone down a roped off section of the mine. I grabbed a lantern and went looking. I found him about a half-mile down a part of the mine we had no business being in. The timbers were falling apart and there was no light. Also no oxygen being pumped in, so the air was pretty thin. I swear to God I could hear the mountain creaking above us. Years of stories about cave-ins and tommyknockers made me paranoid. I grabbed that kid and dragged him out faster than a rat from a sinking ship. I work in IT and we were recommissioning an old hospital that had been closed for a year. All the lights were out, place was in disarray, some homeless people were camping out but no longer there. We surveyed the entire 9-floor building from top to bottom and used flashlights. Worst part was the guy I was with, he was freaking out every time he heard a noise. When we got to the medical ICU he said, "Oh shit, this is where my uncle passed away when I was a kid." Then he went on about how many people must have died in the place. Wind gusted through a broken window and every hair on my body stood up. I got freaked and said, "Let's come back tomorrow during the day when there is more light." Tried to leave the way we came in but apparently the doors locked behind us. We finally found some emergency exits leading to the ground floor, but man, my heart was pounding walking around that joint. Went back a year after it reopened, place looks beautiful and I still got the chills thinking about that night. My paternal grandparents lived out in the woods and the forest they were in always unsettled me. Something seemed off, way too quiet. I thought maybe it was just due to me being used to suburbia, but I now live in the forest not far from where they did and it feels very different. It feels alive, it's noisy as hell, the frogs are making a lot of racket out back right now. The forest around my grandparents' house though, the worst place was a half-mile down a trail, an abandoned Girl Scout campsite complete with cabins. Hadn't been used in decades at least. I don't think they were in use when my father was a kid in the 50s. They just sit forlorn in that unnerving forest, 4 of them surrounding a fire pit. While run down, they're not really overgrown with plants, which is also weird. Was helping a friend of mine while I was unemployed by driving her to all her stops. We came upon an abandoned house at this property we had to be at and for whatever reason, she wanted to have a sticky beak. So we walk up the stairs and poke our heads inside. There was no back door and some of the windows are missing. Place is in pretty bad shape. We walk in and start looking around and I could feel this pressure on my shoulders and a chill down my spine. The place just felt wrong. We look in the rooms and everything is just off. Everything is dull despite being a sunny day. The kitchen is all ducked up and the room's dingy. And then we came across the bathroom and holy duck was that a place of some horrific shit. The door had slide bolts on the outside of it as if someone had been locked in there. The window was painted so you couldn't see in or out and very little light would have come through. The bath was covered in years of filth, the lino all stained, walls were disgusting and just standing at the entrance of this room you could feel the horror of whatever atrocity happened in there. It was an ugly evil feeling and I just noped my way the duck out of there. I have done the Catacomba in Paris, the underground tour in Edinburgh, Bago Road in Brisbane and visited an abandoned hospital in a small town about 1.5 hours from where I live and never have I felt a malevolence like that. There is this huge mental hospital that got abandoned in the 60s in the woods where I grew up. Breaking in there with flashlights in the middle of the night was the rite of passage for all the kids growing up nearby. It was abandoned during the golden age of weird psychiatric experiments, so you can find all sorts of weird equipment in the basement. Bathtubs with electronic equipment, belt beds, weird surgical tools, you name it. The scariest part, however, is the endless hallways with patient rooms though, our crappy flashlights could only light up so much. In one of the rooms we found a satanic shrine with a dead cat, probably made by some other kids. We spent about 3 hours exploring it. In retrospect, I'm thankful that the only cheap flashlight we had didn't die on us in the middle of the hospital. This was before cell phones, so we would never have found our way out in the dark. Being stuck in there with no light would duck me up properly. When I was a kid, I lived in an unincorporated area with a large expanse of wild Texas scrubland. I used to go on adventures out there with my friends. We'd find weird stuff out there, the remains of old, abandoned buildings with antique ovens, an old car with a tree growing up out of it, a crashed, single-engine plane and old machinery we couldn't identify. One time we found a trailer in the thick of it, completely isolated with no roads in or out. The trailer didn't look abandoned though, it was an older style, but it was in good condition all in all. We tentatively knocked on the door to see if anyone was home, but there was no response. We tried the door and found it open. We went in and discovered a living room from the 1940s. It had an old TV with a rounded screen, an old couch and chair, and on the coffee table were old magazines from the 40s. The kitchen with an old latch-handled refrigerator was to the right, and there was a doorway to an empty room on the left. Beyond the kitchen, there was a long dark hallway leading back into master bedroom. As we entered, we realized the carpet was soaked with something because it squished under our shoes. We started looking at the furniture and I leaned on the couch to take a look at old photos on the walls. I drew my hand back in disgust as I discovered the couch was soaked too. As I looked at the photos, I found that everything was covered in some kind of clear slime. It was beading on the walls and ceiling, covering every surface, and had saturated everything. As we moved into the kitchen, which had linoleum, it became hard to walk because of the slime. Because we were watching our feet, we also noticed the bones. There were small, animal bones strewn here and there in the kitchen. The back end of the rabbit here, maybe the leg of a raccoon there. The bones were also covered in the slime. I looked at the oven and saw something white through the window. As I reached for the handle, my friend opened the refrigerator and started to freak out. It was full of bones. Not what you're thinking though. The bones weren't just sitting on the shelves. There were no shelves. The interior was nothing but small, animal bones, thousands of them all crushed into a cube of bones and held together with the slime. I looked back over to the oven and opened it, only to find the same. I remember seeing a rabbit skull in the midst of it, bits of fur and flaps of desiccated skin all saturated with the slime. I then opened the cabinets beneath the sink, bones. Above the oven, bones. My friend looked like he was going to lose it and kind of screamed at me that we needed to get out there. As he raised his voice, something in the back of the trailer, down that long, black, lightless hallway made a loud thud and the entire trailer shifted as if something heavy had suddenly moved. We started for the door as fast as we could, sliding and slipping on the slime, looking back down the hallway, absolutely certain something was going to come tearing out of the darkness at us. We made it outside and ran. We practically ran the entire way home. Even though I had a stitch in my side and was dying of an asthma attack, I kept going. All the while, we were certain something was following us. When we'd stop for a breather, we could hear twigs popping and cracking in the distance. Out of nowhere, birds would start calling and a flock would take to the sky. We ran back across the natural gas pipeline we used as a bridge and looked back. There was nothing but Texas scrubland. Weeks later, we got the nerve to go back. I had an axe and he had a bat and we were ready for anything. When we got there, the trailer was gone. The cement stairs leading up were still there, the blocks that sat under the supports were left behind too, but the trailer was gone. Weirder still, there was no way in or out. No tire tracks, no path. The trailer of bones had just vanished. Friend of mine wanted me to go to Psychic with her. So I agreed. We drive way up in the mountains in northeast Tennessee, almost to the North Carolina line, to this shack. I was already scared and we were not even inside yet. Door opens and this very deliverance-looking bunch of people are sitting inside. Every single inch of wall surface was covered with taxidermied animals, possums, raccoons, squirrels, deer, you name it, it was stuffed in on those walls. Old woman in the corner staring at us. Two scruffy guys sitting at the kitchen table cleaning guns. Middle-aged chain-smoking lady, eyeballs us for 20 minutes before saying, "What are you here for?" So my friend explains that she would like to know who stole some money from her the previous week at a party. Psychic is the middle-aged lady. She sits in a chair in the corner underneath the wall of animals and asks if either of us are wearing contact lenses. My friend was. Woman tells her she won't be able to see anything. Then she turns her attention to me, she says, "Describe what you see." I'm looking at her and I swear to God, she starts shapeshifting into two different people. First a blonde girl with glasses and then a black-haired guy. I am dead serious, this woman shapeshifted. As I am describing what I am seeing, my friend yells out, "I know who that is." Woman turns back into herself and we pay her. We turn to leave and she says something to us in a foreign language. As we got to our car, the two younger guys jump in their car and followed us all the way down the mountain. Scared me out of my wits. My grandparents and aunt and uncle live on a farm in rural South Carolina. My uncle's house was built pre-Civil War, and has some pretty creepy features. In the woods behind his house is an old Civil War era cemetery where dozens of Confederate soldiers are buried. People come on the weekends to place flowers and Confederate flags at the graves, many of which have fallen over or crumbled after years of weathering and erosion. Behind the cemetery is an active hunting club. My cousin and I walked down there once, and it is a few dozen broken down old trailers, and a huge fenced off area about half the size of a football field where the hunters keep their dogs. Sometimes all you can hear is the steady, creepy howling of the dogs in the night. On my family's property are multiple dilapidated cabins, and about a half dozen old boats scattered throughout the woods. Recently a logging company came in and cleared out a few acres of trees, so now some of the woods look like an apocalyptic wasteland. My cousin, who is now in his 30s, used to sleep with knives under his bed because he could hear children playing out on the porch, inviting him to play with him. The icing on the haunted cake is that the road that the farm is on is a dirt road covered with trees and plant overgrowth. I am getting the chills just writing this. I rarely leave the house after dark when visiting. Meredithville, Virginia at 2:30 am. Me and my old band did a little tour down in North Carolina for about a week back in 2010. We all lived just outside of Philly, but I lived in a neighborhood with dense forests and cornfields, so I was used to being in a rural area. We set off on the road at about 6 p.m. with the trailer in tow. We stop in Richmond, get food, meet my doppelganger, and off we go. Next stop, Greensboro, North Carolina, baby. Around midnight, we start playing a car game. We got sucked in, and realized it's 2 a.m. and we need gas. We get off at the first exit, and start following a car. The car turns around, so we keep driving, into a dirt road, with a trailer. We finally back up, and get back on the highway, mildly panicking cause the gas light came on. We get off the first exit, and found ourselves in dense woods. Then, like an oasis, we see a closed gas station. The pumps accepted credit/debit, so we filled up. The forest was silent. Not a single sound. It was eerie as duck. No lights, no life. We decided to smoke a bone in the woods, and capitalize on the fact that literally nobody was around. Then we heard shrieking. High-pitched shrieking. Then we heard branches breaking and leaves rustling. We bounced the duck out. A few days later, we hit the road to head home. It's about 4 a.m., hit the highway, and we start nodding off. The driver wakes us up at 6 and says, "Hey, fork up some cash, we need gas," so I throw him some money. He punches in gas stations in the GPS, and 10 minutes later he says no ducking way. It took us back to the same ducking gas station. This time, it was overcast, and dense fog filled the air. We punched in an alternate route when we set off, cause it said it would be faster, and took us up a different highway. We started to get a little nervous. The station is closed, but we ran out of money on our cards and had to use cash. We sat and waited till someone showed up. At about 6:30, a car pulls up. A rather portly, yet friendly lady, shows up, lets us in, and asks what we were doing there. We tell her about the bizarre occurrence a few nights prior, and she just stares at us. Eyes wide, like she knew we were into something. She told us to get on such and such highway, and she made it a point to say by all means, "Don't go down such and such road, don't go down there," and she vanished to the back of the store. We were freaked. I asked her to come back, and bought a bottle of MD 2020 to calm the old nerves. She rung me up and said, "Okay, you guys can leave now." We obliged, and ducked off immediately. Duck that place. Aokigahara Forest, Japan. I hate to talk about it, but I went there too. Also alone. I was living in Tokyo a while and went through this phase of checking out abandoned places, haunted places and straight up strange areas. It wasn't long until I was told of Aokigahara Forest. I made my way out there one spring day. I felt like I was being watched from the moment I stepped into the forest. The silence bothered me. There were no birds, no animals, no insect sounds. Just an eerie silence. I didn't notice this until a slight wind rustled the trees at one point, and I realized it was the first thing I'd heard in at least 40 minutes. I walked around for maybe 3 hours total. About an hour and a half in, I started to panic. This silence was deafening. I was convinced there were eyes watching me from all around. It felt like the forest was closing in on me. Almost tunnel vision like. I wasn't disorientated, but I felt unstable. I can't explain it. I saw a tent. It was zipped. I didn't want to know what was inside. It was clear it had been there a while, beaten by storms and blown around a little. There were pieces of clothing I saw here and there. A shoe. A jacket. A hat. All extremely dirty and untouched. The image burned into my brain as a note nailed to a tree which said "I'm sorry" in Japanese. That was all. I couldn't walk back to the car park quick enough. The whole way thinking this was a terrible idea, the whole way feeling like something was walking one step behind me, almost pushing me out of the forest. I never want to see that place again. Bad juju amongst those trues. That was 9 years ago. Sometimes I dream of it, it's always a nightmare. The disappearing house. Let me explain. 60 years ago a family up and leaves their house. Cloth still in the drawers, silverware, furniture. They left everything. In the 90s a NY trucker kills 2 women in the house. Rumor has it the house disappears. My boyfriend at the time and I wanted to see it, but as the ground had over a foot of snow we didn't want to go alone, so we call his best friend who says he has been there. We drive down to where this house is said to be and there is no house. We spent 10 minutes trotting through the snow for nothing. We go back to the Jeep and he calls his dad who gives him directions and exact walking time to where this house is. His dad was a realtor. It's getting dark so we grab the spotlights and go back. Right the very end of our footprints, is the first step, with a board laying over top. We went in daylight and while snow is reflective. Neither me, my boyfriend or his friend seen this house. We trudged back in the dark, and there it was less than 10 feet from where our footprints were was this house. 2-story disheveled house. We went inside but I was so scared I almost had a part of attack from fright. I've never been back on that road since. Later, my then boyfriend killed himself. He stated once he see something enter him and slowly he became more and more unstable. I lived in a 110-year-old farmhouse out in the middle of the country about 20 minutes from any sort of town a few years ago. I was living with my parent who was renting it while their other house was being built, divorce, and I was going to start grad school the following semester. This house was well known for being haunted, but my dad never believed in any of that stuff. When I moved in I knew that this place was seriously messed up. This place had a recorded 6 deaths on the property, sickness/farming accidents, since the time it was constructed. Everyone that had ever lived there heard or saw something. The previous owner went crazy drinking himself to sleep in the basement and the one before that committed suicide. Rethinking this place honestly makes me sound insane. I stayed here, but I had nowhere else to go. The first time I noticed something was a few days after moving in. I was washing dishes. The sink was right below a window where you could look outside in the driveway and the door leading into the garage. My dog was barking outside so I figured my dad had just got off work and was coming inside because he got home around the same time every day. I saw someone walk into the side garage door and I could have sworn on my life that it was my dad, so I didn't panic. However, no one came into the house after a few minutes so I went outside calling his name and no one was there. No car, nobody. My dad drove in the driveway a few minutes later. I figured at the time my eyes were playing tricks on me. The longer I lived there the more used to things I got. The dog would always bark at walls in the middle of the night, and this is a well-trained hunting dog. There was an entire upstairs that absolutely nobody stayed in because it was terrifying up there. Smelled terrible, small, and something was off with it like it wasn't very welcoming. Daily and nightly you would hear running footsteps upstairs that sounded like 2 kids chasing each other. At any time of the day, you would hear someone whistling outside and always the same tune, or a woman laughing outside. The worst parts always seemed to happen when I was there alone. On top of the extreme isolation, this place was terrifying. One night I was there alone because I had to work a Saturday and my dad went out of town. I woke up in the middle of the night and heard talking. Almost like a mumbling TV in the other room kind of thing. Waking up groggy, I didn't think much of it until after a minute or so I remembered. Wait, I'm here alone. I tried to make out what they were saying but I couldn't understand it. So I opened my door and grabbed my shotgun and yelled, "Who the F is here?" Dead silent. Closed my door, went back to my bed thinking to myself I was half crazy. I lay down and without skipping a beat the talking starts again. So I bolt up and search the house. Nothing. Dead empty, the dog sleeping out in her kennel. I go back to my room a third time, and it starts again. At this point, I knew I was crazy or that was a ghost. After that, I slept with earplugs, TV, fans, you name it. I had 1 month left in the house before we moved to my dad's new place. On the last week or so I lived there, I was in the kitchen making supper when there was a knock on the door. Keep in mind this place is 20 minutes from any sort of town. It was dark so I see a silhouette of someone standing out there so I go and answer it. Open the door, nothing. The most scared I've ever been in my life. I shut the door, grab the trusty shotgun again and call my dad. I told him I think someone is messing with me, or is here right now. Someone knocked on the door and no one was there. He said he was on his way home, but that was 40-ish minutes away. A few minutes later my dog starts barking, then I hear knocks on multiple windows. At this point I was cowering down in the corner of the room, never having felt crippling fear like I was feeling. Then the running upstairs, and I finally yelled, "Leave me the F alone." Then it just stopped. My dad got home, I told him the story and he didn't believe me. We moved out a few days later and I couldn't have been more relieved. I think I am more scared now looking back on how I stayed in a place like that without realizing how messed up it was. But, when people have nowhere to go they adapt. I think a major part of the fear was the extreme isolation. Being on a 15-acre property with no neighbors, town, or friends nearby was draining. During this whole time, my dad always said he never experienced anything. The day after we moved out he finally admits that something was wrong with that place because he would always hear whistling. Finally, admitting to it. I've been to Clinton Road in New Jersey. Straight creeper vibes. It's a country road in the backwoods of New Jersey. If you've ever heard of the Jersey Devil legend, this is the road where it supposedly live. It's just a creepy road where a bunch of strange things keep getting reported. There's an old foundry along the road that they call the Witch's Forge because apparently a bunch of satanic cultists used it for rituals and stuff. Then there's the legend of the wandering woman, who, if you see here, it means you're not going to leave the road alive. Apparently she's the ghost of a woman who drowned in the lake near the road. And there's also the legend that I apparently came across, which is an old truck that stalks the road and will try to race and will wreck anyone it comes across. It appears as headlights behind you, and will try to overtake you to race you. I'm not one to believe in ghost stories, but every time I drive down this road, including the first time when I didn't know any of these stories yet, I felt eyes watching me from the woods surrounding the road. The whole place is eerie. Portlock, Alaska. Brian Weed is the co-founder of a group called Juneau's Hidden History that primarily keeps track of things through their Facebook page. He has traveled all over Juneau and many other Alaskan towns in search of natural history and stories. His group plans frequent hikes in the area to places that have some sort of story to tell or just to see the natural beauty of the state. We'd started the story with a peculiar death in the 1930s. A logger was out working and something or someone hit him over the head with a huge piece of logging equipment, something that one man couldn't have lifted. When they found his body, there was blood on the equipment and there was no way that one person could have done it. He was a good 10 feet from the logging equipment, so it's not like he slipped, fell, and hit his head. It looked more like someone picked it up and bonked him over the head. There are lots of accounts of creatures being seen in the area. The local natives started talking about a creature, a hairy Bigfoot-type Yeti monster, and it was called the Nantianak, or Big Hairy Creature as it was called. At that same time, the villagers talked about seeing a spirit of a woman dressed in black clothes that would come out on the cliffs above town. They described her dress as being so long that she would have to drag it. She had a very white face and would scream and moan. The villagers would hear something and then she would disappear back into the cliff face. In the 1920s, a man by the name of Albert Petka supposedly scared off the hairy creature with his dogs, but not before receiving a fatal blow to the chest. According to the stories, Petka survived to explain what happened, but died to his wounds soon after. There are also reports of prospectors and hunters going missing frequently to the point that it became commonplace. Their bodies were allegedly found in a creek as if their limbs had been ripped apart. A school teacher in the 1970s even talked about growing up in Portlock and also told stories of people being afraid of what could be lurking in the night. Weed considered himself a skeptic and explained what the Nantianak could have been mistaken for. Maybe they were seeing an extremely large bear in the area. From a distance of say 100 feet, your brain has never seen a bear that big, so you put together an idea of what you think you saw. If the bear is standing up say in the 10 to 12 foot range, it may be the biggest bear you've ever seen, and so your brain may not put together that that's a bear. Maybe you're seeing it from a strange angle or it's too close to trees so you can't see its whole shape. Regardless of his skepticism, there is something uncanny about several groups of people being fearful of this monster. It's definitely an interesting story, but people swear by this. For the locals that grew up in the area, this thing has apparently existed for hundreds of years. There was a small village site at Portlock before it was founded and those people had originally moved away. When the 1930s incidents started to happen, most of the Russian Aleuts actually moved out of town for a year. The people running the cannery basically begged their workers to come back and they set up armed guards for a short period of time, trying to get their workers back in town. Monster or no, people abandoned Portlock en masse. That we can establish as the facts. Those people did leave the town. We know when the town and post office shut down. We know that there are reported murders in the area. They called them murders, but they also included people that just went lost in those reports. We're not talking about a dozen people. We're talking like 3 dozen people. If we have a serial killer in the area at the time, they took out a lot of people in the course of say 20 years. Weed told us that he hopes to visit Portlock to do some exploring. I'm hoping to camp 3 or 4 days in the area and maybe set up some cameras just for kicks. I'm not trying to do like a ghost hunter special or anything, but I would like to see if there are some big brown bears in the area and what might have been seen that would cause people to be spooked. He then explained how Juneau's hidden history focuses mostly on things that are inherently true. Our group has always been about telling the truth and seeing what we actually see, taking pictures of stuff. Do we believe in ghosts, miners creeping around in tunnels? Absolutely not. We've seen a few things that we couldn't explain at the time, but later as we investigated it was, oh, these rocks slid because of this ice, or the timber decided to finally break because it was all rotten. Do we think something touched it at the time? No. The group has many items they have collected over the years, including uncommon maps that they were given to by collectors. Those items were then scanned at a high resolution and shared with the public. We'd has also pitched a television show to the Travel Channel that aired a pilot last April with hopes that they can be picked up in the spring of next year. He says that shows that take place in Alaska often do not show true Alaska and that they hope to change that with their honest depiction of exploring the state. There's a place, a road on the outskirts of Los Gatos, California called Hicks Road. Legend has it there are naked, wild, cannibalistic albinos out there. I saw them once. Also on the road is an abandoned mental hospital. It's all boarded up, but somehow people still hear footsteps walking on the unreachable floor above them. Apparently, they had to shut the institution down because people would escape every so often, only to be found nearby. Eaten alive, by humans. There's something called Hell's Gate/Satan's Door, I guess it's an evil rock or something? There's also a little town at the top of the road. First, duck that place. Second, double duck that place. There's maybe 13 trailers and hand-built houses up there. They all have Confederate flags. The few people I saw looked more hillbilly than I could have imagined. They just stared at me. They all had very few teeth and overalls. Scared the shit out of me. Every time I tell someone about this, they want me to take them there. Nope. But if you must know where the albinos are, it's the first road on the right after the second bridge after you pass the church. Make a left at the fork and drive up a bit. Don't say I didn't warn you. Blue Mist Road near my hometown. It's out in the backwoods of Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. It's not really a road, driving on it is like off-roading. Gravel lined with massive potholes/craters that is not maintained. There is an enormous tree that stands out on the road and has been said that tree was used by the KKK to hang many people outside of their ideology. The lore is the place is haunted by their spirits. My senior year in HS, my buddy and I decided to go check it out. We took my piece of shit Datsun 310 down the road. We had to drive so slow or my car was going to fall apart. We started out laughing, but it got quiet in the car pretty fast as we approached the tree. I would have loved to just floor it and GTFO out of there, but the road made that impossible. It's dark, we are in the middle of nowhere and it's 1987. No cell phones. It was honestly terrifying. I can still hear my buddy asking/pleading to go faster. His voice several octaves higher than his usual. This is not a short road either. In total it was like a 10 minutes drive that felt like an hour. Holy shit, I just googled it for the first time ever. I thought it was kind of a local area thing. Looking at these pictures now is giving me the chills. That happened to me at a local cemetery years ago. It's a huge urban legend in the area that it's haunted. We went late one night, maybe it was Halloween, and just as we were about to leave heard these heavy chains jingle, very obviously, in the trees at the edge of the plot. The whole group of us froze. Then we heard it again. A heavy chain being dragged along stone, or something rough. Then we hear the most inhuman growl I have ever in my life heard emanate from the woods on the edge of the cemetery. The whole group screamed, broke, and ran for the car. I stopped halfway back and was like, but wait? What actually could that be? I rallied a couple of friends and we went back into the cemetery, towards where the sound came from. As we got about 10 feet from the edge of the woods, 3 kids come charging out of them, laughing their asses off. They said they've been coming there for years ducking with people on Halloween. In all the years they had been doing it, we were the first group to come back to investigate. They had several sections of logging chain and, rather ingeniously, a section of that corrugated dryer vent tube. They would roar into that, and wiggle it around, and it would modulate their voices in a really fantastic way. It was truly terrifying in the dark of night. We chatted for a bit and had a good laugh about it all. We then promised to keep their secret and went on with our evening. Absolutely amazing night. I don't quite remember what this place was called, but my dad used to be a pastor at some church. Because of that, I had to stay with him on weeknights because he needed to prepare for the sermon on Sunday and talk with the team, leaving me, a 7-year-old, bored with nothing to do for 1 to 2 hours. Well anyway, I got his permission to explore the church one night, and started to go off on my own. I went through a few rooms that didn't mean much to me, a kitchen, supply closet, etc., but then I opened a new door, one I'd never seen before. I opened the door and found this old nursery room. Thinking about it now reminds me of some of those liminal spaces that you'll see in certain places on the internet. The lights in that room were barely working, and the room was full of old wooden toys, some faded, scratched up wallpaper, and a carpet that was partially detached from the floor. I was in there for probably no more than 10 seconds, after that I got too scared and noped out. The church I went to growing up. It was well over 100 years old and was Gothic revival. Architecture. Nothing but stone, tile and brick with lots or ornate wooden carvings and gold relief. It was beautiful. However, there were all these twists and turns. Tunnels and odd, almost secret passages you could explore as a kid. Whenever we were in certain areas there was always feelings of being watched. A presence in the room. Lurking. Maybe God is real? Anyways, this place had a couple classrooms where I saw my first shadow people. Scared the crap out of me. Always down this hallway, a dark shadow would be standing in an empty classroom. I got ballsy one time with my brother and we checked it out and no one was in the room. I would see that shadow figure in various rooms. It got to the point I wouldn't go to certain areas of the church alone. I stopped attending church when I was 18. The only place I can think of at the moment is an old state hospital up north by my parents' place. Creepy encounter incoming. Part of it was still in use while other parts and some of the upper floors was abandoned. My mom used to work there taking care of people, and sometimes she would have to go across the abandoned parts to reach the other section of the facility. She recorded some of her walks in the abandoned areas and they gave off such eerie vibes. She said she felt like she was constantly being watched and or followed, and the silence up there was strong enough to hear your heat beating, and sometimes patients/staff in the other parts of the building. I never got to go inside, but my mother did drive my stepdad, husband and I up there one evening, and by time we got there it was dark, which made the entire property creepy as hell. As we drove up to and around the building, I got a chill up my back and made the joke about someone watching us, just to lighten the mood when out of nowhere, a white security vehicle flashed its lights from behind us. We hadn't seen him at all in our time being there. It was a bright night with the moon being close to full, for context, so we have absolutely no idea where he came from, but even the security guard who got out of the vehicle was creepy. He kept eyeing all of us while standing there outside the car just listening to my mom explain who she was and why we were there. Then after a few minutes he just grunted and said, "Well, it's best if you get out of here, they don't like visitors." My mom asked if he was talking about the night staff and patients, but all she got was another grunt and a sure, them. We promptly booked it out of there, and even though my mom quit due to unrelated circumstances a few weeks later, she still never got to ask what the guard meant that night by them. Freaky stuff. I tried 3 times to go to Dudleytown. It's a spot in the woods in Cornwall, Connecticut that used to be a small village that ended up falling victim to many spontaneous killings and fires. After so many people died, the rest of the town vacated and now all you see are the stone ruins of the houses and other buildings. I live about 2 to 3 hours from it, not because of the distance but because of how damn difficult it is to find. The dirt road that winds up to it has an entrance that's basically hidden in a row of bushes off of a side road. There's small houses alongside the dirt road as well. You get to the end of the dirt road and it's a small little clearing where you can park. The locals have been known to cut brake lines though. It used to be open to the public, but there was a fire caused by some campers a few years back and now it's illegal to trespass and is heavily enforced. Cults still use the area regularly for cult things. Anywho. First time I went, I drove the 2 hours with a chick friend of mine. We got to the parking area and looked down the trailhead. Shit just didn't look right. You ever see a creepy picture where you can't quite place what skeeves you out? That's how it was. To the point where we said duck it and drove back home. We didn't even get out of the truck. On the way home, about 20 minutes from my place, one of the wheels just kinda fell off the truck. I was driving at about 70 on the highway and I see the lug nuts kinda fly off followed by the wheel and the truck slammed to the ground and I managed to guide it to the shoulder. Scary as duck. I'm also a hobbyist gearhead. All my vehicles are kept in great condition and I assure you those lugs were torqued. Second time I went up with a couple of friends of mine. It was a beautiful day the entire way up. The second we got to the parking lot, a fog rolled in and we all immediately noticed it. We also noticed how deathly silent it was. No birds, no insects, no squirrels, nothing. So we acted big and brave and decided to walk in. As we walked in it started to rain. We stepped further inside and a huge branch fell from above us and hit the ground, feet from us. So we got a little weary and turned back out. Wanting to lower our anxiety, we tried to talk to some of the locals that lived on the dirt road. We knocked on what must have been like 6 or 7 houses, but every one of them was completely empty. As we walked back to the car, a random dog started barking at us ferociously, but we couldn't see where it was. We immediately left, and I've been telling people to stay the duck away from that place since. There's tons of articles that try to dispel all the stories and myths, but I know what I saw and it was ducking terrifying. I've been in an abandoned psych ward, Catacombs of Paris, in a tour, and have bought drugs in some shady neighborhoods in both Detroit, and even the back of a club owned by the Russian mob, but nothing compares to just the overall sense of dread found in Gary, Indiana. There is an actual feel to it, almost like stronger gravity. The city literally feels like it's holding you down. Being a primarily white-looking guy, fair-skinned Persian, stopping to get gas on the way to Chicago was nerve-wracking. The few people I saw all just immediately stopped talking and started staring at me, and held the stare as I fueled and left. Even the people inside the store, when I was outside pumping gas. No one said a word. Not to me, or each other. Not a single word. The streets were empty. Not with just people walking, but cars too. There was maybe 2 other cars seen per mile on the road, which was surreal due to the concentration of buildings around. It made me feel like I had stepped into a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and I was not welcomed by the inhabitants. Every person I saw, while driving, even the young kids standing outside in random places, gave me the same, emotionless, stare. It wasn't hatred so much as a "you shouldn't be here" look, as if almost trying to warn me. In the back of my mind, they were potential predators, and I was the prey. I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger, and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings that usually operate in the evening. Nearby I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5 to 6 story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked in the dark, small entrance of the building. The building was older and hasn't been well maintained, but it's not out of the ordinary in Taiwan. The entrance just had a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. The elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the building, but I didn't think much of it. Like some Chinese buildings, there wasn't a 4th floor. It's considered bad luck since 4 sounds like death, so it just read 1 2 3 5 6, which was usual. I looked for the floor the net cafe was at, 6th floor, and pressed the button. It lurched into action quietly and began the ascent. When it stopped, I figured it was my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before stepping out, however, the sight outside the elevator stopped me. It was pitch dark, only lit by the light in the elevator. It looked like it hasn't been occupied for decades, with some random pieces of furniture covered with white cloth or similar. It was a small building, so each floor were single occupancy, so I could see pretty much the entire floor from the elevator. Thinking I must have gotten the wrong floor, I checked the light that indicates which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing, none of the indicators were on, but the floor button to the net cafe was still lit, so I know I haven't gotten there yet. All this happened within a couple of seconds. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance of the floor. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looks like a person dressed in some kind of gown, moving slowly towards the elevator. I was thoroughly creeped out, so I started pressing the close door button. As soon as I pressed it, the elevator light flickered off. I am this close to pissing my pants, and it's actually kind of freaking me out thinking back to it. The lights flickered back on under a second and the door closed. The elevator jolted back to life. A few moments later it opened again to the net cafe. I am beyond relieved at this point. I walked out immediately and sat down at a computer. After gathering my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told them what I saw. The girl working there listened and her face turned a bit ashen, so I asked her if she heard of similar. She told me that she's never experienced it, but some co-workers and occasional customers have brought it up. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and the 4th floor had a history. Apparently the floor used to be a hair salon of sorts, until one of the employees killed herself there for some reason. She slit her wrists over the hair wash station and died. The store continued operations despite stories of weird appearances. When customers got their hair rinsed, the water would look a little red, like the customer was bleeding, little things like that, and a couple people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in the mirror. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to re-rent the place out, but never had any luck. Most businesses are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor after someone had died in it, even at a very cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supplies store wanted to rent. During the renovations of the floor, however, several accidents would happen. Tools would end up in strange places. A mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it, And finally a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working and finally, the business left and the building owner finally gave up and shut down the floor. He then had the elevator company come in to replace the panel so that the elevator could not go to the 4th floor. Let me repeat that the elevator was programmed to never go to the 4th floor. It doesn't even have a button. But for some reason, sometimes when people take the elevator, it would go to the 4th floor and the doors would open, and some, like myself, would see a figure walking around in the dark.